counties rather than as these larger regions, which I think is a step in the right direction. I understand some of the thought process behind the regions, but I think what we experienced out here is it really just took away the power of our community. We've worked really hard to keep our numbers good, and when the community sees that that work doesn't pay off, it makes people less interested in following the guidelines. And so I think that that will be a hopeful step in the right direction. There's also going to be some changes to the phase metrics. One of the things that led to some consternation with the most recent round is that it was all about trends. So if your case numbers were decreasing, then you would move forward. But it didn't pay at all any attention to just the sheer case number, which is a key data point, right? So you could go from 400 to 300 cases per 100,000, but you're still in a terrible situation. And that was what happened with King, versus places like us have always been low. And we maybe just are staying low rather than dropping. And then that didn't pay off the way the metrics were built before. So that's going to change in the next round. They're going to include case rates per 100,000, the one we're used to reporting, and that we are doing really quite well at as a community. So that's hopeful. I would say we have a very high likelihood of going to phase 3 as soon as things get announced. The exact case rate cutoff is still up in the air. That's being decided right now. There's a lot of different players, as you can imagine, putting in their thoughts on where that should be. And I think the challenge is you want to move forward, fast enough to take care of the businesses and the people who really need that income. But you also don't want to move forward so fast that you get a massive spike and everything goes backwards again. And so that's the delicate line we're always trying to walk. One of the questions that was posed, I think, is a very good one for folks to understand to what extent one can, which is what is the interaction between my office and the governor's office? And how do these things get decided? Do I get to decide? Does the governor get to decide? How does that work? And so the basics are that the governor can set policy for the entire state and we have to follow it. I can't overrule him. So say he says that, we stay in phase 1, I don't have any power to change that. What I can do is I can do more stringent things. So, which, in the context of the pandemic has been rarely necessary. But say the governor says, you can all move to phase 3. I technically have the power to keep us in phase 2. So I can always do a more stringent thing than he does. I'm not planning on doing that, so please don't fear that. But I have that option to do more stringent things than the state. So that's kind of the basic legal framework. Otherwise, we have a weekly call between all the county health officers and the State Department of Health. So every Friday, we all get on the phone, talk about how things are going, talk about where policy needs to go. But as you can imagine, that's all the counties in the state. And so, there can be differences of opinion. There are often differences of opinion with basically the I-5 corridor having one way of doing things, and then both sides of the state having different ways of doing things. Lately, it's been all the rural counties trying to kind of band together to have a voting block against the I-5 corridor, which any of you who know politics know that is a common situation. But and as far as kind of how that informs policy, that has changed a little bit. So, really a lot of how we would inform policy before was my office would talk to the Secretary of Health and the state health officer. And we had a lot of pull to change state policy related to that. Unfortunately, the state health officer stepped down and the state secretary of health stepped down. So there's a new guy in town, Dr. Shaw, who's great, but he's new. And so he's still kind of building his political capital at the state. And so I think we've lost a little bit of influence in that way, just because of the change of people in those roles. So we're working on building those connections again and building more kind of advocacy strength there. But that's kind of roughly how we interact. We certainly do talk a lot, and I advocate very strongly for Clallam in those calls because I do think that State Department of Health does tend to be a little bit more I-5 focused. They're based in Tumwater. A lot of the cases, a lot of the people are in Tacoma and Seattle, and that makes sense. But the situation out here is different, and often we need different things. And so we try to bring that to the forefront as often as we can. But the final decision does come down from the governor's office. So sometimes he says stuff that I have agreed with and that I've had some role in writing. And other times I am as surprised as you guys are. So that's kind of how our offices interact. So with that, the only other question on phase 3 is kind of when is it going to happen? Given kind of the trajectory of our most recent call with the state, I would suspect that they are likely to announce something in the next couple weeks about a possible phase 3 move. That's what it's looking like. And if we keep our numbers where we are very likely to move to phase 3. It's going to be another one where it's just set by metrics. It's not going to be that kind of complex application process we had in the first round. So with that, I'm happy to be available for any questions you guys might have.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Berry. I know I have one. I understand that in different areas of the state, the governor and his staff are having listening sessions with community leaders, business, and government. And that's been going on in this last week or 10 days or so. Is there a potential that we could have something similar so that we can share in a respectful way, in a positive, constructive way, our view and situation?
That I don't know. That's kind of more at the pure governor's office level as opposed to state DOH level. And so I don't know, but it certainly would be worth advocacy about, because I do think understanding how things go out here is a somewhat unique place. We did get, Dr. Shaw did come out probably about 3 weeks ago. And so he did a little bit of a listening session here, but it was only with kind of healthcare leadership, not with community leadership. But I think it's a reasonable request for sure.
Okay, great. I see Donna has a question. Donna, do you want to ask your question?
Dr. Berry, I have a 93-year-old mom in assisted living. So for all of us that have parents in assisted living, the residents are allowed to, this is in SQUIM, the residents are allowed to go about anywhere in the community. Family members can take them out. We are all vaccinated, but that doesn't matter. We can take her out and take her about anywhere, but we are not allowed to go into her apartment. She has severe macular degeneration and can barely hear out of one ear. She's very mentally aware. And my sister and I would go into her apartment daily and pick up after her and nurture her and love on her and take care of her needs. And assisted living doesn't do any deep cleaning. They just do the generalized cleaning. There have been some downfalls with assisted living, and we had always had a great partnership with them and oversight. The state DHS is not allowed, if there's a complaint, their nurse is not allowed to go in and do an investigation. They're not allowed inside the facility. The ombudsman is not allowed inside the facility. A family member is not allowed inside the facility. So there's no oversight. And we're not allowed inside the facility to take care of our mother's apartment for over a year. What is the rationale for that? What can we do to facilitate some correction on that? It seems completely illogical. It's unbalanced.
So yeah, a lot of things there. First, just want to acknowledge that I do think those living in long-term care and their families have been the most affected by this pandemic of anyone, disproportionately so. And I think the visitor restriction was very important in the beginning of the pandemic. It's one of the key ways we kept folks safe, even though it's incredibly painful. But I do think it's been incredibly difficult for families and for those who are living in those situations. And I think there are ways we can change it. The challenge that we run into with long-term care is that you have several jurisdictions overseeing long-term care. So it's not just Department of Health, like my office, but also DSHS, and then the federal CMS from there. And so often we run into the challenge where the different legislative bodies have different priorities. But there is, I think, growing momentum to change the current system, to increase allowing families in who are vaccinated, because we know these vaccines are really good. So if you're fully vaccinated, to get a support person indoors to assist with your loved one's care and just to be there. There are certainly long-term care facilities that are kind of experimenting with options for how to do that, having indoor visits with, masking and distancing and things like that. And then a lot, we should be at our current level eligible to have a single support person for someone who needs that, who could come in, who was masked and screened and ideally vaccinated as well. So that should be, and that's something we can talk some more about your specific situation offline, of how to make sure that communication is happening with that facility to make sure that you can have a support person in there, because that should be eligible now. But there is very likely going to be increased options for visitation, particularly for folks who are vaccinated in our community. And from my perspective, being that person for someone in long-term care, that support person, makes you count as a multi-generational household. So if you aren't already and you are that support person, you are eligible to get vaccinated. So to facilitate getting in there sooner rather than later. It sounds like you've already spoken to your ombudsman. That is kind of your best go-to as far as if there are serious concerns about a safety issue in a long-term care facility, linking your ombudsman with my office, we're not afraid to go in anywhere. And so we can certainly send some of our staff in to examine the situation and see what's going on.
Great. Thank you very much. Next, Chair Allen, you had a question?
Just a quick question, Allison, on the number of vaccinations that we've accomplished to date, total, and also second doses. What's that number? What's the percentage for our county?
So we are at 31% of our county has received their first dose. And I'd have to look at the numbers as of today, but I believe it was pretty high. I think it was like 18% have received their second dose. So we're vaccinating really quite well. The challenge we're running into, which kind of comes to the next question that someone raised, is that we're running out of people to vaccinate in the current tier. So the 1B1 group, we're starting to see our vaccine clinics not fill. And so we've been pushing the governor's office to allow us to move to 1B2, which is, your critical infrastructure workers, things like that, because we're kind of having to stall because we don't have anyone left to vaccinate. Now, of course, we still have some vaccine clinics open this weekend, but I know talking with Brent and our experience in Port Angeles, we're just not seeing the slots fill. And so we're hoping we can move forward sooner rather than later. But that's part of why you'll actually see Jefferson pulled ahead of us, which was a point of disappointment for me. I was very proud of vaccinating more people than the rest of the state. But that's because they have a larger percentage of their population over 65. So they still have people to vaccinate.
Well, I'm talking to the governor's shop too on this topic. The bucket that they're trying to steer us on vaccinations is quite frankly stupid. We agree that you want to be the most vulnerable, but you got to be practical to get the most done expeditiously and timely. So fortunately, we don't have to listen to it. We listen to your advice. But we're vaccinating as fast as many as we can. So it's like the teachers, we're waiting for the teachers. I'm sorry, we're vaccinating them. I just think that you got to stop trying to create these buckets in terms of controlling the most vulnerable, which we agree to. But quite frankly, most important is do it practically and stop creating bottlenecks that slow down the process. So
yeah, I agree with you on that. I think we're, it made sense to some extent in the beginning to be very limited because there wasn't enough vaccine. But as the vaccine increases, I think we should do everything we can to not be a barrier to vaccination to our community. And certainly there are a lot of people who want to get vaccinated. And so we would like to move faster. And we are very grateful to the partnership of the tribe for making that possible.
Well, it's at the tribe, the local church that we're working with, and all the volunteers. So we have to do a big shout out to those volunteers, those nurses that we recruit and come out and do that job. It's a tough task, but they're the warriors. One last question. Well, how are we doing on hospitalizations?
We still have had no hospitalizations in about 3.5 weeks.
Good. Okay. All right. All right. Well, I got to get on another Zoom call, Colleen. So I'm signing off. Thanks, Allison, for the great work.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next, Edward, you have a question? You have your hand up?
Yeah, good morning. Hey, I wondered if, Dr. Berry, if you could just mention to everybody on the call who's not in healthcare, help them understand that there's a parallel course for the long-term care Safe Start Washington plan and what those metrics are, because that might answer some of the questions that came up earlier.
Yeah, so there's along with the phases, so we've got the phases for kind of the economy, and then there's a separate kind of phased reopening of long-term care that is similar, but not exactly the same. And they have very specific metrics that they have to meet before they can increase in-person visits and things like that. And so one of those is actually the percent positivity of our tests. And so for a brief period, our percent positivity was so high that they couldn't do some of those things. So that has to do with, whether or not people will have to be quarantined after they leave the building. That has to do with whether or not they, what kind of family visitation is acceptable. And certainly it looks like actually Ed might have shared in the comments a link to some of those things, because there's a lot of details in there, but we could definitely make sure that that gets shared to anyone who's interested for kind of how those decisions get made, because I think it's important to acknowledge that those who work in long-term care are also exhausted by the amount of regulation that they're having to follow, and often would like to have more visitation, but just have to meet all of these different guidelines in order to get you in to see your family.
Thank you. Lori, you have a question?
No, I think she answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, that's why we canceled the Sunday VA clinic, PA clinic, because we just didn't have enough people left in B1. But I am in conversation with the governor's office outside of our Friday calls. I can also call them on other times, and have been strongly pushing to move forward to B2.
Lynn has a question.
I see you post about when we can meet in large groups.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries. Hi, Lynn. Nice to see you.
Hi, good to see you. Thank you.
So large groups are risky. It depends a lot on how you do it. So if it's outside with distancing, you can get a decent number of people, but you have to be really thoughtful about keeping that 6 feet, keeping a mask on, staying far apart. The challenge that you have is the more people, certainly in an indoor area, the higher probability that one of those people has COVID. And so if you blend those people together, then the risk gets really high. So at this point, I would still say small groups is the way to go. So keeping those at 5 or less. Now, if everyone in that room is vaccinated, you can start to increase those numbers. So say you could do 10 people, for example, if you're all vaccinated. Getting much bigger than that, I think, brings some risk, certainly increases the risk to your pod. What I've been telling folks, hopefully, I don't know if you're vaccinated, but hopefully more people on this call are getting vaccinated as we go. If you are in that vaccinated group, it would be reasonable to increase your social circle to pretty much anybody who's vaccinated. And then maybe one other household of non-vaccinated people. So for instance, in my family, I hadn't seen my brother in over a year because he's a firefighter in Seattle. And so given our 2 high-risk groups, it just was not a good idea to bring us together because of our work exposure. But now that we're both vaccinated, we can meet up. And so things like that, you can expand your circle to vaccinated folks. I have a quarantine pod locally, which includes one unvaccinated person. And so we're not really expanding much beyond that because we know that in our circle, we have someone who's not protected. So that's kind of how I encourage folks to think about it.
Great, thank you.
So yeah, no
Helpful.
large groups. Try not to travel as well is the other big one. So we have relatively low rates here. That's not true everywhere. And so I really discourage a lot of interstate and international travel as much as possible. Try to stay local. If you are fully vaccinated and do need to fly, say you've got a loved one you haven't seen in years or in over a year because of this, just be thoughtful about safety on that plane. So make sure you wear a good quality mask, you wear it the whole time. Think about what happens when you get there. Wash your hands, especially after TSA. TSA is your highest risk time because you're lined up and you touch a bunch of stuff. And then once you get there, think about who you're meeting when you're there and how many exposures you have there. And then when you get back, if you leave the state, we are still recommending that you quarantine for 14 days. Now, that doesn't mean you can't leave your house at all, but it does mean you need to be thoughtful about being in close proximity to other people for the 2 weeks after you get back. Now, if you are fully vaccinated, i.e. you've had 2 doses more than 2 weeks before you left, you don't have to quarantine when you get back.
Okay, great. Thank you. Kai Alberg has a question about travel. Kai?
Morning. I want to give a shout out to everyone involved in the vaccine clinic. It's amazing how well organized and how well set up it is. I was really impressed. My question is about the priority categories for the vaccine, what the next categories are, and to what extent we are kind of hogtied by the governor holding us back, that we are not allowed to vaccinate people, even though we have the vaccine outside the tribal category. And also, if at some point it might be possible to sign up for vaccines in future categories that haven't been opened up yet, like you make an appointment and you're told, well, we're 6 weeks out, but we can see you in early May. We don't have anything available for the next 6 weeks. And finally, at the end of the stage, by when do you think will we get to the point where everybody who wants a vaccine can get one, which I think is what Alaska has moved into this week?
So several good questions there. So the next priority category by the state tiers is critical infrastructure workers who work in these congregate settings. So people who are exposed because of their work. And if you think about it, if you think about your folks who were really high risk from back in the day when we were shutting everything down, but folks who were still going to work, that's grocery store workers, food bank workers, transit operators, agriculture and food processing. So think of like fish packing plants, things like that. The courts and jails and corrections, and then any remaining first responders that for whatever reason have not been able to get vaccinated yet. That's primarily who falls into that category. That used to include teachers, but we've already gotten to them. And then the other group that actually got added into B2 is also pregnant women and people with a disability that makes them at particularly high risk and unable to protect themselves. So like those folks who actually can't wear a mask, so thinking of folks with like significant developmental delays, things like that, those all fall into that group. So that's the next group that's coming up. We anticipate we could vaccinate that full group within the next 2 weeks. As far as what is limiting us right now, it is actually just that we are waiting for the state to tell us we can go, which is frustrating for everyone, including and especially the people who are up next for a vaccine. I understand some of the thought they want the state to move forward together, but it is a challenge. And then the other limitation is still, unfortunately, vaccine. We don't have infinite vaccine. I think the point where we could actually book people out weeks and weeks in advance and open it to everybody is when we have enough vaccine for everybody. And we're getting closer. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the invoking the Defense Production Act to actually start making more vaccine faster, all of those things will help us get there. I would say we're likely to get to the point where anybody can get a vaccine in about May. So we're close. It's not far off, but we're not there yet. We still have to move through the tiers. And I think I am cautiously hopeful that the governor's office will see that it's time to start pulling back some of those barriers to vaccination as we move through these tiers. It made sense to have a high bar early when we didn't have nearly enough, but now it's time to make it easy. One of the strange things is we're one of the only counties where there's a single website you can go to schedule. That's a strangely uncommon phenomenon. And so we try to make it simple, but we would also really love to start being able to book out weeks in advance. The trick to that is we only know how much vaccine we're going to get 1 week in advance right now. So that's why we can only give you a week at a time, because as you may or may not have seen if you follow along, is some weeks we don't get any. And so then we can't book as many slots. But it looks like we're going to start getting about 3 weeks notice pretty soon. And so we can start planning further and further ahead.
Have you or state officials had any conversations with our friends in Canada, what their requirements may be for eventually opening the border? So let's say in May, everybody in Washington state can get a vaccine, which means in June, everybody, we're going to have 70 or 80% of the people vaccinated. Do we know if the Canadians have some scientific metrics, or are they just saying, well, we'll just keep the country shut down for the whole year regardless, which I understand some politicians are saying?
It's a mix. It's definitely a mix with Canada. I would say, I think it will likely depend on case counts in the United States. So what we're really going to need to see is our rates go down. Our rates are so much higher than theirs that they are nervous about us. But the other thing that I think would likely change that is the idea of a vaccine passport. So if you're fully vaccinated, then you could start to cross the border. And so I think it's very likely that it's going to start to open up in the summer as we see vaccine rates rise here, but only to vaccinated people. And you'll have to show proof of
Is there anything in the works for an internationally accepted vaccine passport that one can take that little sticker that one gets at the high school when one gets vaccinated and get something that if you go to Canada or you go to England, you can show and they say, oh yes, this actually proves you've been vaccinated?
There is some work on that. I would say other countries are ahead of us on that one. The United States has not done as much work on that, but I think that is very likely in the near future.
Thank you.
No worries.
So thank you. Also, I was on a call just this week with the Consulate General of Canada and the US, both there, and I'm going to try to get them on one of these coffee chats here soon, so they can speak to what those limitations are and what they're reviewing. Then next, Amy Kunkel had a question. Amy?
Hi, good morning. I've been trying to get my parents signed up for their immunizations for, it feels like a month, but it's probably only been a couple weeks. But I sign it every day and it just says it's like unavailable or it's shut, like maybe they reached their limit. Is there a trick? And we live in PA. Can I sign them up for the one in Squim?
So good questions. So don't quite know what was going on there, but it does open on Wednesdays. It opens Wednesdays at 9. So if after this call you log in, you'll see you can schedule. And so I think part of the trick is it probably depends what day you're going on to log in. But it's opens every Wednesday at 9 a.m. and then we keep it open until Saturday when we start vaccinating. So log into that vaccine.clallam.net/register and you can get them vaccinated. But we are originally there was a push to try to keep folks in their area, but we're really trying to remove that now, and you can just get vaccinated wherever works for you. And so just select what site works for you. Especially as we're likely to see the tribe being able to move forward faster than the rest of the county, then I'm fine with people from PA going there too. We want to get more folks vaccinated. So, but yeah, that's the trick for everyone is it opens on Wednesday at 9. So if you go Wednesday at 8:30, or if you go Tuesday, you're going to see that there's no slots, but every Wednesday it'll open. And at least last week it didn't even fill. So there should be, and we're opening up 950 more slots at 9 a.m. today. So in the next half hour, you should definitely be able to get your parents' schedule.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
So Frank has a question.
Yeah, good morning. Just like curious on what the recommendations are for a pregnant woman at this time. Our daughter is pregnant in Seattle and it is a concern.
So yeah, we do know that COVID-19 is a significant risk for pregnant women. And so, and we have mounting data that the vaccine is quite safe in pregnant women. Now, the original studies are almost never done in pregnant women. They just don't include them in first round trials. And so all of the data is coming in from vaccinating healthcare workers. Actually, it's pregnant healthcare workers that we're studying right now. And they're doing great. And so do we Do we have enough to put out a formal recommendation for vaccination of pregnant women? Not quite yet. But I would tell you that all the data that we currently have is that the vaccine is safe and that COVID-19 is very much not. And so what we recommend at this point is to have your daughter talk to her healthcare provider about their recommendation for her, knowing her personal health history, where she is in her pregnancy, things like that. But I would say most healthcare providers I know are recommending it for pregnant women. And most healthcare providers I know who are pregnant are getting it. We do have enough data now to say that it's very safe in breastfeeding. So at this point, we just recommend it in breastfeeding women. There's no evidence that there's any crossing into breast milk, and there's some possibility that it actually increases protection to the baby.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you. Debbie Soderstrom, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I am with the Sequim City Band, and our rehearsal space we use for the Sequim Community Orchestra as well as the band. The band has not started any rehearsals yet. The orchestra has started some small group rehearsals. And my question has to do with what is the current and near future outlook for rehearsals, number of people, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, wind instruments and choirs are tricky. We certainly have evidence that super spreader events can come from that. That you project aerosols in a wide direction, much further than 6 feet with wind instruments and with singing. And so that's been the biggest limitation about bringing those back. Now, we're at a point where there's guidance from the governor's office on how to do it if you're gonna do it. There are ways to bring back wind instruments, but I would caution that there's a difference between you can and it's a good idea to do so. Right now, I would say I wouldn't personally feel comfortable singing in a choir or playing in a band unless everyone in that band or choir is vaccinated. And so building an ensemble of fully vaccinated people, I think that could be done well. Or certainly as things start to get warmer, doing that outside and spaced out apart, I think that's another way that it can be done well. But a large group of unvaccinated wind instruments indoors, even 6 feet apart, does definitely increase your risk of a COVID-19 outbreak. And I would say from the quarantine perspective, as the people who make those decisions on quarantine, if you got a positive in your band and you played, we're going to quarantine all of you. And so you want to be thoughtful about exposure in that context as well.
Great, thank you so much.
As a French horn player myself, so I know how hard it is to not play those things.
Okay, next, Colleen Robinson.
Hi, Dr. Berry. This is Colleen Robinson with Habitat for Humanity. We are bringing a young woman, AmeriCorps service member, to our area early April to serve with our affiliate. She's coming from Oklahoma. She's not vaccinated. What is your guidance on what to do when she gets here? Should she get a COVID test? How long to quarantine?
Great question.
What should we do?
Generally, your safest option is to quarantine them after they arrive. So basically, you go from the point they touch down in the state and have them quarantined for 14 days before you incorporate them into your workflows. That's the best option. You can do 10 days if that presents a significant hardship, the 14-day cutoff. Or you can, in some specialized circumstances, do 7 days and a test. Not all healthcare providers will do a test for travel because it tends to actually kind of bog down testing. But there are some pharmacies in town you can get drive-through tests for. And so that would be another option, is have her come in, quarantine for 7 days, and then test her. And then she could start to work as long as she's asymptomatic.
Thank you.
Okay, next, Patty Morris. Patty, you had a question?
I did. I went to Rite Aid, Port Angeles, the East Side one the other day to pick up a prescription, and they said they would do the shot with Johnson & Johnson right then. I'd already had both shots, but is there coordination with the local drugstores on vaccination, and who has that? And are they under the same guidelines on who can be vaccinated by the state guidelines?
There is some coordination with the pharmacies, though it is kind of complex in that their vaccine comes from the feds. And so they do have to follow state guidelines as far as distribution here, but they're not incorporated into the vaccine that we get any visibility into. So like I know a week or two in advance of what's coming into the other Clallam County sites, but what shows up at the pharmacies just arrives. And there's and very little visibility from our end into what's coming there. We're doing a lot of outreach to them to try to get them kind of looped into our system. So far, what we've been experiencing in the pharmacies is the vaccine shows up and there's not a lot of training and there's certainly not a lot of infrastructure to help them with distribution. And so I've found them mostly just overwhelmed because suddenly they've got 100 doses and they've got thousands of people calling for it and they don't know what to do. And so we're trying to help them figure out how to move that supply. Part of what has happened is a lot of that Johnson & Johnson was sent because the federal folks wanted that to be available to teachers. But in Clallam, we've already vaccinated our teachers. And so now all the pharmacies just don't know what to do. So they're grabbing anybody over 65 and volunteering to vaccinate them. But we'll see if we can loop them in more. The biggest challenge we have is they're multi-state organizations. And so they still answer to boards in like Oklahoma and New York. And so trying to loop them into our county system has been complex.
Well, is it reasonable though that a person, if they're having trouble getting it, might check with the pharmacy?
Yeah, there's certainly no harm in checking if they have a vaccine. The pharmacies are legitimate sources. So if you are there and they're offering a vaccine, absolutely get one. And certainly for folks who are struggling to navigate the online system, that can be a good option. Just reminding folks that there is a lot of vaccine available at our mass vaccinations as well, so that it should be pretty easy to get in there. You can also call the main EOC number Monday through Friday. So if online registry doesn't work for you, call 417-2430, and there's a person who will answer and will schedule you.
Thank you.
No worries.
Great. So are you getting the information from them about how many people have been vaccinated?
Yes. Yeah, we do get information.
Great. Kevin Galacci, Clallam Transit has a comment and question.
Yeah, I just have a comment, Dr. Berry, thinking a little more what Chairman Allen's comments were earlier. Just to let you know that, transit workers are in that next phase, but I know a lot of our employees have already got the vaccination, as well as prison guards too. So that issue with having more vaccine than people in the group may compound here in that next phase. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So
thanks for letting me know. And I'm glad your folks are getting vaccinated, because you are people that would really like to get vaccinated now or yesterday. So I'm glad that folks are getting vaccinated, but you will be eligible, all of you, as soon as we move to B2. And that's one key thing, is they removed the 50+ exemption, which is smart. So it's getting a little easier, but yes, we'd very much like all of your staff who can to get vaccinated.
Yeah, it's been relatively easy for them to go get the vaccine through just word of mouth and occupations that maybe their wife is in and things like that. So, and through pharmacies. So anyway, thank you.
So Andra Smith from the Swim Food Bank has a question.
Hi, good morning. Yes, I do have a question. As one of the organizations and businesses that are in the next tier coming up, what is your recommendation on what we should have ready in regards to our staff and volunteers? Do we need to provide them with any documentation as proof of volunteering with our organization to be considered in that part? Thank you.
I think ideally, if there is some kind of identification that they're a food bank volunteer or worker, that is helpful. But we are also trying to reduce barriers as well. So we're likely to take their word for it if they show up and say they work for the food bank. But the more official documentation that they can have, whether it's an ID or like an email that they can print off, that'll definitely make sure that they can get through easily at the sites.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have had people who make stuff up and sneak through, and so that's always the balance. Is we don't want to cause a whole trouble there. But at this point, I just want to vaccinate everybody. everybody. Like if you can get there and we have vaccine, I want people vaccinated. So we're going to likely try to reduce those barriers as much as we can.
Okay, thank you. Lindsay, Fox has a question.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Dr. Berry, for your time today. With all the discussion about the extra vaccine or just, extra amounts that now we're running out of people, what consideration or are there any plans for people that can't get to the clinics? Are we going to do any sort of home visits or remote vaccinations? How is that going to be handled moving forward?
We actually are doing that already. So we're doing home visit vaccinations through a variety of sources. So we're doing working through OMC Home Health, Volunteer Hospice is working with us, OAAA and the VA are all, and also the community paramedic are all distributing vaccine to people who can't leave their homes for whatever reason. Now the challenge is figuring out who all those people are. So if you receive home health services or hospice services, we already know who you are, and you're in the queue to get vaccine distributed to you, as are the veterans who are already receiving those services. But if you aren't receiving any services, but you know of someone who is homebound but not really kind of keyed into the system, give us a call at the EOC or at HHS as well, and we'll schedule them for a home visit vaccination, because we can do that. And we definitely do that kind of outreach to anyone who's eligible, but for whatever reason.
Wonderful, thank you.
Oh, okay.
So thank you. Obviously Jamestown tribe has been able to get a lot of vaccines, and they've been distributing them in SQUIM, and I assume that's from a federal distribution channel. Are the other tribes getting a large amount too? And how does that allocation system work? Do you have any insights into that?
Yeah, so the allocation system, so the tribes are actually, most of the tribes locally are getting it from the state. But there are treaty obligations with the state that allow them to get kind of higher amounts of vaccine than other folks. So Jamestown, I think, has certainly been ordering more than everybody else. And so far it's been mainly getting filled. The Makah tribe also has quite a bit. And they utilize that to vaccinate the vast majority of their tribe, and then also their neighboring teachers. Quileute also got a little extra, not a ton, but they didn't order as much. And then Lower Elwha is the only group that's actually working through the federal program. And that has been slower. They've had actually less success getting large amounts of vaccine than other folks. As far as how allocation works, the first round of allocation was just a mess. So basically the state reached out and said, how much can you move? And that's actually the biggest reason why we got so much vaccine, is because we could move it. And so folks are like, how did Clallam get so much vaccine? Is because we kept moving it. So because in the beginning, in that first month in January, no one had mass vaccination built. And so it was getting sent to hospitals or clinics, and then it was sitting on a shelf, and the state didn't want to do that anymore. So they put out I think it was the right decision, but it made it really messy. They said, look, you got to get rid of all your vaccine. If you can get rid of all your vaccine, you can get more. And so we just started pumping it out. And as soon as we got rid of it, we got more. But then, as more counties came online, then they had to come up with a rational distribution system. And now finally they have a rational distribution system, which is you get it based on population. So we're 1% of the state's population. So we're going to always get 1% of whatever they get from the feds, which for our population and how much they're getting right now is about 3,000 doses a week.
So that's for the county, but then the tribes get their own allocation that's above that?
Potentially. The Jamestown is somewhat unique in that they're vaccinating outside of their tribe. And so the state is not quite sure what to do with them, in all honesty, because they're like, we keep giving you, your tribe isn't that big, but we keep giving you this vaccine. And so they may at some point get incorporated into our county totals, but then there's all this kind of sovereignty stuff. And so my suspicion is they will be able to continue to get at least more vaccine than is needed for their population. Whether or not they can keep getting the numbers they've been getting, that's a little more up for question.
Okay. Have you been tracking the amount of vaccinations by area? How is Forks doing? Clallam Bay, you know, I would assume Squim's doing very well because of the amount that Jamestown has been receiving, but can you share some information about that if you have any?
Yes, so we have been tracking vaccination kind of rates and percentages across the county. And the impressive thing to me is that we're actually pretty equal across the county. So Squim certainly initially had a spike because of Jamestown, but then the Port Angeles mass vaccination caught Port Angeles up. And then Forks has been doing an incredible job. It's shocking how fast they move vaccine given the number of folks working there. And so they're actually right on par with all the rest of us all the way through. And so pretty much consistently about 30% across the county is vaccinated. Clallam Bay had a little more trouble in the beginning just because really remote, but Forks has done 2 direct outreach clinics to Clallam Bay, and that's gone really well. We've started doing a direct outreach to Joyce because that was kind of an underserved area. And so we're working on catching up Joyce. That was one of the only spots that needed a little more help.
I know as I've tried to speak to Rod Fleck over a weekend, he's usually at a vaccine site.
Yeah,
I
see Rod here. They're doing an amazing job. It's really very impressive. I think it's one of the cool things about this whole process is learning so much about the different parts of the county, and the West End takes care of themselves. Like they don't need much, and so it's been cool to see.
Mm-hmm. They are a tight-knit community, that's for sure. All right, so we've had a lot of really great questions. I didn't realize how many nuances there would be, but obviously there are. And so terrific questions that we've had. Does anybody have anything else that they want to ask? Okay, if not, I just want to do this one plug for PPP loans. I want to make sure everybody knows that right now there are these PPP, they shouldn't be called loans, they're grants, and they close at the end of this month. But in the first round for Clallam County, we had about 1,200 businesses get PPP loans, but we have 6,742 businesses in our county, or we did anyway. And so that's 5,000 businesses that did not receive a PPP loan. And now it's for sole proprietors and self-employed and independent contractors, particularly. If you file your tax return on a Schedule C, you can get essentially 21% of your gross. It used to be net, but now it's gross income. So if you look at what you made in 2019 or 2020, and you don't even have to show a reduction in revenues, as long as you were affected, which every business out there was closed down by the governor for quite some time last April, you can get 21% of your revenues. And so I just, we're trying to get the word out. We're making lots of phone calls to all sorts of businesses, but if you know of a business that might benefit from that, please let them know. We're happy to help. There's lots of individuals that will give personal guidance and assistance through this process, plus their banks. The banks are just doing a fabulous job. Sound and First Federal have really been doing some yeoman's work there. So does anybody else want to add anything? It's 8:53 and we do have another 7 minutes scheduled for today. I see Kevin, you've got your hand up. Kevin. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, that better?
Yes.
We just received a notification from WASDOT that the FTA is allowing transportation to vaccination sites. And so this is new to us, it's recent. We're gonna sit down here with staff and figure out a plan if that's possible. So if we're able to do that, we'll first contact Dr. Berry, and then through the EOC, we'll figure something out there. But we have to figure out the logistics and how that's going to work. So at this point, but it is a possibility, I will say.
Thank you. Oh, and I also want to, since we spoke a bit about vaccines, I just want to acknowledge that the vast majority of the vaccination effort in Clallam is done by volunteers, including from several clinical partners. So OMC, North Olympic Healthcare Works, Community Hospital, Jamestown Family Health Center. All those people are working on this effort, and we are not paying them to do it. And so it's we're hopeful that we're going to get some money to reimburse all of those groups that did that. But I just want to acknowledge there's no way we could do this as our tiny department without all this shocking coordination and volunteerism across our county. So thank you to everyone who's making that vaccine happen.
Great. Micah, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, just to go off the little bit you were saying about the PPP, if anybody you know has any questions about if they're eligible or needs help applying or anything like that, I'm putting my email in the chat. Send them my way. I can answer any questions they've got.
Yep, fabulous. Okay, thank you so much. We really appreciate everything everyone's doing. I think we've got, this has been such a horrific time for so many reasons, but boy, have some really wonderful connections, partnerships, and support come out of this, which makes me really proud that when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and we help one another within the community. And it just makes me proud to be a part of Clallam County and our individual communities and working with all of you through Zoom. So thanks everyone. Thank you very much, Dr. Berry. We really appreciate your time today, and hopefully we'll have you on and you can give us some results of what percentage of our county did get vaccinated. I've been watching the permits that have come through. They've been housing permits, and we've doubled the housing starts over the last 10 years. And yet the state shows we're only in the last 10 years, we've only grown by maybe 6,000 people, which doesn't seem to make sense to me. But I know that, we're a growing community, and we've just been doing such a great job of trying to take care of one another. And so thanks to everybody. All right, with that, I think we'll call it a morning, and enjoy your day, everyone. Thank you.